The Montana sky stretched endlessly above the plains, a sharp blue canvas broken only by the occasional hawk circling lazily overhead. Dust swirled along the Tulane road that wound between golden fields and rust-colored hills. It was the kind of place people passed through, not stayed in, unless they had nowhere else to go. Elijah Hayes knew that feeling well. He was 34, wiry and sunburned, with calloused hands and a lined face that made him look older than his years. A mechanic by trade and a father by necessity, Elijah lived on the outskirts of the sleepy town of Crow Ridge, population 841. His garage barely brought in enough to keep the lights on, and with his 6-year-old daughter Maddie to care for after his ex walked out, life had been a grind for as long as he could remember. But he was a man of principle. He fixed what was broken. It was the only way he knew how to survive. That morning, he was elbow-deep in the rusted engine of a 2003 Ford when a dust cloud appeared down the road. A battered green farm truck, the kind built to last but rarely maintained, limped into view, wheezing like a dying animal. Elijah wiped the grease from his hands and stepped out into the sun. The truck coughed once, twice, and finally died 50 feet from his garage. The driver's side door creaked open. Out stepped a woman, tall, blonde, mid-30s, wearing designer sunglasses, denim jeans that cost more than his weekly groceries, and boots that had never seen mud. She looked around like she'd landed on another planet. She was striking, but also completely out of place. "Need a hand?" Elijah called, already walking toward her. She hesitated. It just stopped. No warning. "That old Chevy's lucky it made it off the highway. Let me take a look." As he popped the hood, she stood by awkwardly, pulling her jacket tighter against the wind. She didn't introduce herself, and he didn't press. He was too focused on the engine, a mess of corroded wires and a cracked radiator hose. "You're lucky you broke down here," he said finally. "Another 5 miles, and you'd be in Coyote country with no cell service." "I didn't plan on breaking down anywhere," she said with a small, forced laugh. He looked up at her then, really looked. She was hiding something. Fear? Frustration? Maybe both. But he'd seen that look before. People running from something they couldn't fix. "I can get you back on the road in an hour. You can wait inside. Coffee's not fresh, but it's hot." She hesitated again, then nodded. "Thanks. I appreciate it." Still no name. As Elijah worked, Maddie ran out of the trailer next door, all curly hair and jelly-stained fingers. "Daddy, who's the fancy lady?" she shouted, giggling. The woman laughed for the first time, a real laugh. "Elijah," she said quietly. "My name is Charlotte. Charlotte Hale." He froze for a second. He'd heard that name before. Somewhere. But he had no idea that the woman sipping burnt coffee in his office wasn't just another stranded traveler. Charlotte Hale was a billionaire, the hidden heiress to Hale Agricultural Holdings, the largest private landowner in the state. And Elijah Hayes, broke single dad from nowhere, was about to step into a story he never saw coming. The smell of old coffee, motor oil, and sunbaked wood filled the cramped office of Hayes Auto. Charlotte sat stiffly in the only decent chair, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug like it was a lifeline. She stared out the window at the plains beyond, her $1,000 sunglasses perched on top of her head, forgotten. Elijah worked outside, sleeves rolled up, wiping his brow with a rag that had seen better days. She watched him from behind the dusty glass, the quiet intensity, the way he moved with purpose. Nothing about him said lazy or stupid, the way so many men had looked at her when they realized she had more money than they'd ever make in 10 lifetimes. He hadn't flinched when she said her name. He didn't know who she was, and that was a relief. Back in Bozeman, Charlotte couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone recognizing her. Tabloids had stalked her since she was 22. Ever since her father's company, Hale AG Holdings, exploded into the national spotlight during the land wars of the early 2000s. The name Hale was both a legacy and a curse. But now she was running. Not just from the media. From the boardroom coup, the NDA she'd broken, the trust fund she'd torched by leaking evidence of illegal water grabs her father had ordered years ago. She had money, but not like before. Her fortune was locked, her lawyers nervous, and her enemies multiplying. This truck had been a backup plan, a relic left on a cousin's ranch. She hadn't planned to break down, but maybe fate had other ideas. The door creaked open, and a little girl walked in, holding a peanut butter sandwich like a prized jewel. "My name's Maddie," she said, walking right up to Charlotte with zero fear. "You're pretty. Are you a singer?" Charlotte smiled. "No, but thank you. I wish I could sing." "I'm gonna be a singer and a cowgirl and a doctor," Maddie declared proudly. "But Daddy says I gotta learn to brush my teeth first." Charlotte laughed, surprised by how easy it was. "Your daddy seems nice," she said softly. Maddie nodded. "He's the best. He fixed Mrs. Daly's car and didn't even charge her 'cause her cat died. He makes pancakes with smiley faces, too." Charlotte's smile faded slightly. The kindness was so casual, so unbranded. In her world, even charity came with a camera crew and a press release. The door opened again, and Elijah stepped in, wiping grease from his hands. "All done," he said. "Replaced the hose, cleaned up the distributor. Should get you to where you're going." Charlotte stood, slipping her sunglasses back on like armor. "How much do I owe you?" He shrugged. "Call it $70. She blinked. "That's low." "You caught me on a good day," he said with a dry grin. She pulled out a thick wallet, the kind that screamed Fifth Avenue, and handed him 100. "Keep the change." He took it hesitantly. "You sure?" Charlotte glanced down at Maddie, who was now using a wrench as a microphone and singing off-key. "I'm sure." As she turned to leave, Elijah's voice stopped her. "You heading far?" Charlotte hesitated. "No," she said finally. "Just figuring it out. Well, roads are long out here. And quiet. Be careful." She paused at the door. There was something about the way he said it. Not flirtation, not concern. Just truth. And it made her want to stay. But she didn't. Not yet. She stepped into the sunlight, started her truck, and drove off, kicking up dust. Elijah stood at the doorway, watching her go. She was trouble. That much was obvious. But the kind of trouble that didn't just pass through without a reason. And something told him. He hadn't seen the last of Charlotte Hale. 2 days had passed. Elijah didn't expect to see her again. He figured Charlotte Hale had vanished down the road like a mirage, another rich outsider brushing shoulders with small-town life before returning to private jets and penthouse suites. But she lingered in his mind. He caught himself thinking about her while changing oil filters or stirring pancake batter for Maddie. There was something in her eyes that had stuck with him, like a storm building behind glass. A woman used to control who had suddenly lost it. Then, Thursday morning came. Elijah stood in line at the Crow Ridge Market with a loaf of bread and a six-pack of off-brand soda, thumbing through the day-old newspapers by the register. That's when he saw it. Heiress goes rogue. Charlotte Hale leaks family secrets, disappears. There she was, front page of the Montana Tribune, her face unmistakable even under a wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses. The article was sensational, accusing her of whistleblowing, betrayal, and possibly fleeing with classified company data. They called her unhinged, volatile, and the heiress turned anarchist. Elijah muttered, "Shit." He bought the paper. Later, back at the garage, he read the article twice while Maddie colored cartoons on the floor. According to the report, Charlotte had exposed her father's illegal acquisition of native lands under the guise of agricultural expansion, a secret deal that had gone on for years, with millions siphoned through shell companies. She'd provided evidence to an environmental group and disappeared shortly after. Her family's lawyers were now spinning the story. Her own father, Jeremiah Hale, the iron-fisted billionaire behind Hale AG Holdings, had labeled her emotionally unstable in a public statement. Elijah leaned back in his chair. So that's who she was. And she'd sat right there, drinking his burnt coffee and smiling at his daughter like she wasn't a walking headline. He looked out at the dusty horizon. Something didn't add up. He knew lies when he saw them. People trying to bury the truth with power and money. He'd seen it in custody courtrooms, in banks that denied him a loan with a smirk, in the way wealth rewrote the rules for its own convenience. But Charlotte? She didn't seem unhinged. She seemed cornered. That night, as the wind howled across the plains and Maddie slept curled up beside an old stuffed rabbit, Elijah sat on the porch, paper in hand, staring out into the dark. Headlights appeared in the distance. A single pair. Moving slow. He didn't move at first. But when the familiar green farm truck pulled up beside the garage, his breath caught. Charlotte stepped out, hair tousled, eyes red from travel or tears. He couldn't tell. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, voice hoarse. He nodded once, slowly. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded. And just like that, the story that had begun with a broken truck turned into something neither of them was ready for. Elijah didn't ask questions that night. He didn't ask why she came back or who might be chasing her. He didn't ask about the headlines or the scandal or what it felt like to be America's most wanted billionaire heiress. He just handed her a plate of leftover chili and poured her a glass of lukewarm sweet tea. Charlotte ate like someone who hadn't in days. They sat at his tiny kitchen table, scarred wood, one leg shorter than the rest, surrounded by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of wind against the trailer walls. Maddie stirred once in her sleep, but didn't wake. Charlotte finally looked up from her food. "I leaked the truth," she said, voice flat. "But no one wants the truth from someone like me. They want me to be the villain, the spoiled traitor." Elijah leaned back in his chair. "I read the article." "Of course you did." She gave a bitter laugh. "You probably think I'm insane." "No," he said quietly. "I think you're scared. And brave. Those two don't cancel each other out." That silenced her. For a long moment, Charlotte stared at her hands, as if trying to remember who they belonged to. "I thought I could do something good for once," she whispered. "You know what it's like to grow up in a world where money can erase anything? Guilt, death, land. My father buried everything under a bank account. When I leaked those files, I thought maybe I could stop it. Maybe I could matter." She looked at Elijah, her eyes searching. "Is that pathetic?" He shook his head. "It's honest." Charlotte blinked, surprised by the answer. Outside, the wind picked up. Dust rattled against the windows. "You can stay here tonight," Elijah said finally. "It's not much, but the couch is decent. Just for the night. After that, we'll figure out where you're headed." She opened her mouth to protest, but then stopped. Her shoulders dropped. "Thank you," she said. That night, while Elijah tried to sleep and Charlotte curled up on his couch in silence, the world outside kept turning. But not quietly. In Bozeman, a black SUV idled outside a lawyer's office, its occupants holding a photo of Charlotte Hale and a list of known associates. In Billings, a man in a suit stared at a map of the state, red circles drawn around every small town without a police station. And in Crow Ridge, population 841, the storm was already gathering. Because Charlotte Hale wasn't just a runaway. She was a threat, and someone very powerful wanted her found or silenced. Morning came quietly in Crow Ridge. The sun rose over the wheat fields like melted gold, casting long shadows across Elijah's garage and trailer. Inside, the smell of bacon drifted through the small kitchen as Maddie clumsily stirred pancake batter, humming some country song half remembered from the radio. Charlotte sat at the table, barefoot, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Her eyes were puffy from sleep but alert, like a deer too used to hearing gunshots in the woods. She looked so normal there, wearing one of Elijah's old flannel shirts and nursing a chipped mug of coffee. But normal doesn't last long when you're hiding from billionaires. Just after 9 a.m., a black SUV pulled into the lot. Elijah saw it before anyone else. Dark windows, spotless paint, out-of-state plates. No dust on the tires. Not local. He didn't say a word. Just wiped his hands on a rag, stepped out onto the gravel, and waited. Two men got out. Suits. City haircuts. The kind of men who didn't smile unless they were lying. "Morning," Elijah said, eyes narrowed. The taller man flashed a badge too quickly to read. "Private security. Hale Holdings. We're looking for someone." Elijah kept his face neutral. "A lot of people pass through here." The man glanced at the garage, the trailer, then back at Elijah. "She's about 5'9". Blonde. Might be driving an old Chevy pickup. Name's Charlotte Hale." Elijah crossed his arms. "That's so. She's in danger," the second man said. "We just want to bring her in safely." "She a criminal?" "No," the taller one said too quickly. "But she's confused. We're here to help her. Family's worried sick." Behind Elijah, the screen door creaked slightly, Charlotte watching from the shadows. He didn't turn around. "Wish I could help," he said. "But I haven't seen anyone like that." The two men looked at each other. "You sure?" Elijah smiled. "You calling me a liar?" They hesitated. The wind howled across the lot, carrying dust and tension. Finally, the taller one stepped back. "If you see her, call this number. There's a reward." He handed Elijah a card. Black. No logo, just a number. The SUV rumbled back onto the road and disappeared into the horizon. Inside, Charlotte stood frozen. Elijah turned and shut the door behind him. "You're not safe," he said. "They're not cops. They're corporate muscle." Charlotte clenched her jaw. "They'll keep looking." "I know." She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Maddie looked up from her pancakes. "Daddy, who were those men?" Elijah knelt beside her and tucked a curl behind her ear. "Just some folks asking dumb questions, sweetheart." Charlotte watched the way he smiled at his daughter. Calm, steady, shielding her from the storm outside. "I shouldn't have come here," she whispered. "I'm putting you both at risk." But Elijah just stood and said, "You didn't come here by accident." She looked up at him. And for the first time in a long time, Charlotte Hale didn't feel like a fugitive. She felt like someone worth protecting. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm, like the eye of a storm pretending to be peace. Charlotte stayed hidden. By day, she helped Elijah around the garage, pretending not to flinch every time a car pulled up. At night, she sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, listening to Maddie talk about school and dreams and ponies she didn't have. Elijah didn't ask for explanations. He offered something rarer, silence and space. But that couldn't last. On the fourth night, the quiet broke. Charlotte had just rinsed the dishes when the sky lit up orange, not from the sun, but fire. A mile out, a barn was burning. The glow spread across the horizon like a second sunrise, and then came the sound, distant sirens, crackling timber, shouting across the fields. Elijah burst through the door, already pulling on boots. "That's the Jefferson place," he said. "Dry land. Could spread fast." Charlotte followed him out, heart pounding. "Was it lightning?" she asked. Elijah paused. "No storm tonight." And then something in his eyes shifted. He smelled it too, gasoline. This wasn't an accident. 10 minutes later, they reached the blaze. Local volunteers were already there, shovels, buckets, a single hose hooked up to a cattle tank. Men yelled. Women herded animals away from the flames. The fire roared like a living thing. Elijah jumped into action, grabbing a line and shouting orders like a man who'd done this before. Charlotte helped too. No one recognized her, not in the dark, not with ash on her face and sweat in her eyes. She worked until her arms ached and her lungs burned. It took hours, but they got it under control. By dawn, the barn was gone, black bones against the sky, but the fire hadn't spread beyond the fence line. Elijah stood staring at the embers, hands on his hips, his jaw tight. "Someone lit this on purpose," he said. Charlotte turned slowly. "You think they were sending a message?" "I think they were looking for you." She shivered. Back at the trailer, Charlotte showered in silence. When she came out, wrapped in a towel and exhaustion, Elijah was at the table, holding a piece of paper. "I made a few calls," he said. "I've got a buddy down near Missoula. Ex-Marine. Owns a cabin off-grid. No cell towers, no cameras." Charlotte looked at him. "You want me to run?" "No," he said. "I want you to survive." Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to people caring. Not without wanting something. "Elijah," she began. But he cut her off gently. "You don't owe me anything. Just don't let them win." She stared at him, heart pounding. And then she made a decision that surprised even herself. "I'll go," she said. "But not yet." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "I need one more day." He nodded once. One day. What she didn't tell him was this. She had one last piece of evidence. And she planned to use it, no matter the cost. Charlotte sat cross-legged on the floor of Elijah's small garage office, the laptop screen casting a pale blue light across her face. Outside, the sun dipped behind the hills, bleeding color into the wide Montana sky. Maddie slept in the trailer, and Elijah was working late under the hood of a tractor someone had dragged in from 20 years ago. The silence was brittle, like the calm before something shattered. Charlotte reached into the lining of her duffel bag and pulled out a flash drive the size of her thumb. It looked harmless, insignificant, but it held everything. The emails, the wire transfers, the satellite photos of illegally diverted riverbeds, audio recordings of her father's top executives laughing about stolen water rights and forged land deeds. She had stolen it from the vault at Hale Holdings headquarters during a charity gala. She had worn a red dress and a smile, walked past board members with champagne in one hand and betrayal in the other. Now, months later, the weight of that decision pressed into her chest like iron. She plugged in the drive and opened the folder. Everything was still there. She had made copies, of course, 2 hidden in safety deposit boxes under fake names. But this was the original. the proof no one could refute. And she had a plan. Charlotte drafted an email to a journalist named Zoe Mendez, a relentless investigator with a reputation for burying corrupt empires. They'd spoken once, cryptically, through a burner phone. Zoe was waiting for this. She attached the files, wrote a brief note, and hovered over the send button. Her hand trembled. If she sent this, there would be no more hiding, no more peace, but there'd also be no more fear. Charlotte clicked send. The email vanished. She exhaled like she hadn't breathed in days. Just then, Elijah walked in. "Tractor's a lost cause," he said, wiping his hands. "Guy who brought it in said it survived 3 floods, but I think that was one too many." Charlotte shut the laptop. "Elijah," she said softly, "I did something." He raised an eyebrow. "I just sent the files. All of them. To a journalist who can burn them down with truth." He didn't look shocked. Instead, he nodded. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" "No," she admitted. "But I'm tired of running." He stepped closer, and for a moment, the space between them shrank into something unspoken. "You're brave, Charlotte. Braver than you think." Her voice caught. "No one's ever said that to me without wanting something in return." "I don't want anything," Elijah said, "except for you and Maddie to be safe." She hesitated. Then she leaned in and kissed him, gentle, brief, but real. When they pulled apart, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because the truth had just been unleashed, and hell was about to follow. The story hit the internet like a bomb. By noon the next day, the Washington Post, Reuters, and Vice were all running headlines. Heiress exposes billionaire father in explosive land theft scandal. Charlotte Hale goes public. Whistleblower or rogue daughter? The files Charlotte sent to Zoe Mendez were more damning than anyone expected. Not only had Hale AG holding stolen millions of gallons of water from reservation lands and diverted it to private ranches, but they'd buried lawsuits, blackmailed tribal leaders, and forged conservation permits going back 15 years. Zoe didn't hold back. And now, Charlotte's name was everywhere. By evening, reporters swarmed Bozeman. Helicopters circled the Hale estate, and Jeremiah Hale's legal team began their desperate counterattack. They accused Charlotte of data theft, defamation, mental instability, and espionage. None of it worked. The proof was too clean. But exposure comes with a cost. That night, just as Elijah was locking up the garage, a rock smashed through the trailer window. Maddie screamed. Charlotte grabbed her and dropped to the floor, shielding her body. Elijah ran inside with a wrench in one hand and rage in his eyes. Outside, the black SUV was back, and this time, it didn't leave. 2 men stepped out, not in suits now, but in tactical vests and earpieces. Not cops. Not legal. Something in between. One shouted, "Give us the girl, Hayes. She doesn't belong here. She's got nowhere else to go." Elijah barked back. "And you're trespassing." Another rock flew. Elijah ducked behind the door, heart pounding. His shotgun was in the shed, too far. And Maddie was crying in Charlotte's arms. Charlotte stood, shaking. "This is my fault," she whispered. "They want me. If I go out there." "You do that," Elijah said, "they'll disappear you. That's not an option." The men outside began advancing. Elijah looked at Charlotte. "Get Maddie to the truck. Take the back way. I'll buy you 10 minutes. Charlotte's eyes widened. "Elijah, no." Now. There was no time to argue. She grabbed Maddie, who clung to her neck, and slipped through the back door, heart racing. Elijah stepped into the yard alone. "You're not taking anyone," he said, voice like steel. One of the men raised something, not a gun, but a baton. The other pulled a stun device. Elijah swung first. He caught the baton wielder across the jaw with the wrench, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The second man lunged, tossed Elijah in the ribs. He dropped to his knees, teeth clenched against the voltage. But he didn't fall. He roared, swung again, and cracked the taser out of the man's hand. They weren't trained for resistance. They ran. Elijah collapsed onto the gravel, smoke rising from his shirt, the wrench clattering beside him. From the hills, Charlotte's truck disappeared into the trees, dust in its wake. She didn't look back. Not yet. But this fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. The truck rumbled along a back road barely wide enough for 2 tires. Charlotte gripped the wheel, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. Beside her, Maddie clutched a blanket to her chest, her cheeks streaked with tears, but silent now, brave, like her father. They drove for an hour through twisting canyons and pine-dense ridges before reaching the cabin. It was barely more than a shack, wood-framed, metal roof, camouflaged by wilderness. A place built not to be found. Charlotte parked behind a thicket, helped Maddie out, and knocked on the warped door. A grizzled man answered, tall, gray-bearded, one eye squinting at the girl on his porch. "You Charlotte?" She nodded. "You're early," he said, then looked at Maddie. "And you brought a +1. She's why I'm doing this." The man nodded once. "Name's Roy. Elijah told me you'd be trouble. Said to keep you safe. So that's what we'll do." He stepped aside. Charlotte and Maddie went inside. Back in Crow Ridge, Elijah sat in the county jail, not as a criminal, but as a witness. After the attack, Sheriff Laney had finally shown up. One look at the bruises, the broken window, and the SUV tracks was enough to convince her something darker was at play. She didn't like Elijah, said he was stubborn and too proud for his own damn good, but she trusted him. "The FBI's involved now," she told him as she poured coffee. "Thanks to the leak, they've frozen Hale Holdings accounts. Jeremiah Hale's going to be busy lawyering up for a while." Elijah nodded, still sore. "She okay?" Charlotte. Laney asked. "Last I heard, she's with Roy." "Good." Laney raised an eyebrow. "You like her?" Elijah stared at the wall for a moment. "She's fire under pressure. Doesn't run when she should. Makes dumb decisions for the right reasons." Laney smirked. "So yes." He didn't respond. Meanwhile, in Bozeman, Jeremiah Hale was unraveling. His fortune was under investigation, his assets frozen, and his daughter's face was plastered on every screen in America, a symbol of betrayal and justice. His empire, built on silence and intimidation, was crumbling fast. "She'll pay for this," he growled to his lawyer. Family or not. But Charlotte was no longer a Hale in name or loyalty. And she wasn't done yet. That night, in Roy's cabin, Charlotte watched Maddie sleep on a cot by the fireplace. She sat by the window, one hand resting on a shotgun, the other scrolling through her phone. Messages flooded in. From journalists, activists, strangers, people thanking her, offering help, calling her a hero. But all she could think about was Elijah. His busted lip. His quiet strength. The way he'd stood alone in the yard to give her a chance to run. And she realized she wasn't done running to something. She was going to finish what she started. And then, she was going back to him. 3 weeks later, the media frenzy cooled. Hale AG Holdings was gutted from the inside. Government investigations spread across 3 states. Arrests were made. The water theft scandal dominated headlines for days, then gave way to the next crisis. But Charlotte Hale remained in the spotlight. She didn't run. She stepped into it. With the help of Zoe Mendez, she gave interviews, calm, unflinching, detailed. She testified before a federal inquiry, backed by damning documents and iron-willed resolve. She spoke not as an heiress, but as a woman who chose conscience over comfort. And America listened. Some praised her. Others called her a traitor. But no one ignored her. When the dust finally settled, Charlotte disappeared again, this time by choice. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just drove. Elijah stood behind his garage, welding a piece of busted tractor frame, sweat dripping down his back. Maddie played in the shade with an old toy horse, humming to herself. Life had returned to a kind of quiet. But he hadn't forgotten her. Not even for a day. So when he heard a truck pull in, that truck, his heart stopped. He wiped his hands, squinting toward the driveway. Charlotte stepped out in jeans, boots, and a soft smile. She looked different. Stronger. Calmer. Free. Maddie squealed and ran to her. Charlotte dropped to her knees and hugged her tight. "You came back," Maddie said. "I promised I would." Elijah stepped closer, unsure what to say. Everything he'd wanted to tell her felt clumsy now. Too big for words. Charlotte stood, brushing dust off her jeans. "I couldn't stay gone," she said. "Not from you. Not from her. Not from this." "You're safe now?" he asked. She nodded. "Safe. And free. My name's clean. My father's name, burned." Elijah looked at her, long and hard. "You didn't have to come back." "I know," she said. "But I didn't want to start over somewhere else. I want to start here. If you'll have me." He didn't answer. He just pulled her in and kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was home. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the Montana hills, Charlotte sat on the porch with Maddie in her lap and Elijah beside her, his arm around her shoulders. The fire had passed. The secrets had burned. But in this little forgotten town, beneath a sky too wide to cage, a billionaire's daughter had found something worth more than land or legacy. She had found peace. And maybe, just maybe, a future.